Okay, good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name's Angus Barnes and I'm the Executive Chair of the Wine Communicators of Australia, and I will be your moderator here today. We're very fortunate to have DTC business coach and strategic consultant Georgia Rasmussen presenting this month's webinar with a focus on the DTC Road Map and channel planning. And maybe I should just pause here and say DTC, direct to consumer. George is an expert in the field and always has practical tips on how to best approach DTC channel planning for your wine business. In this presentation, she'll provide a refresher session on her DTC roadmap and highlight areas that need addressing to optimise your results. She'll then walk through how to prioritise your to-do list to tackle these areas. Now, Georgia has more than 25 years' experience as a business manager and consumer marketing professional in the private and public sectors, with the majority of her experience residing in the wine category. She's a strong record of success building and managing direct and digital marketing businesses in both the USA and Australia. She has a depth knowledge of distribution systems and multi-channel marketing models for both commercial and high-end boutique brands. And she leverages expertise gained in both medium and large-scale business environments. Georgia applies her skills in strategy, innovation, and practical execution combined with strong commercial acumen to produce market-leading results. Now, just letting you know that we will record today's webinar, and a link of this recording will be available to all WCA members and attendees via the WCA website. We have allowed plenty of time for questions today you may wish to be answered at the end of the webinar. However, feel free to send them through as they come to mind. And the way to do that is at the bottom of your screen, you'll have a Q&A button, and if you can press that and then type your question in. Let's jump straight into it. Over to you, Georgia.
Thank you, Angus, and welcome everyone. Thank you for that intro. It's good to be back here, another DTC presentation. I think my last one was around the same time last year. And in chatting to Prue and Angus about what to talk about today, I ended up deciding that I would do a broad sort of refresher of the roadmap. And again, I've looked at the list of attendees on today's webinar. A lot of you I've spoken to, or you may have jumped onto one of my webinars before. So there may be some content that is repeated. But hopefully you just take this sort of 45 to 50 minutes to, I guess, just think, step out of your day-to-day sort of roles and think about the areas that you might need to focus on that will give you further leverage in the DTC channel, which is a valuable and growing channel. So my background, and I have to say, I actually can't move the slides. Sorry, everyone. Just give us one sec. So have I lost control of that, Will? Or is there just a delay? I think there's just a delay. Okay, we're off and running. Phew. All right, so for most of you probably know my background, but it's deep in the wine sector and particularly deep in the DTC space. And I've been consulting in this space for about 15 years now. So I've seen the channel move through sort of the early phases and into where we're at today. So for those of you that have listened to one of my webinars before, you would have seen my DTC Road Map. And this is really, I put this together actually through COVID when I did the Wine Australia webinars. And it was really just to give people a bit of a feel for the areas that they needed to consider and optimize in order to drive value through this channel. So this is what I'm going to revisit today. I'm not going to spend much time on areas 6 and 7, which are customer experience and fulfillment, just because I think there's probably more value in some of the content in the other areas. But suffice to say that customer experience and customer service are incredibly valuable parts of the channel in terms of, I guess, driving down attrition and servicing your customer base well. And then fulfillment feeds into that in terms of, right product, right place, on time, unbroken. But I think for those of you in the channel, the fulfillment piece is probably a little more straightforward than some of the other areas. So this is my roadmap. And then before I get straight into it, I always like to do a little bit of sort of chatting about macro trends, what's going on in the market, and then drilling that down into the D2C space. So, and again, look, some of you may well be familiar with some of these macro trends, but I think it's worth just setting that as a little bit of a backdrop. And the ones that have sort of shone out to me are the ones on this page, certainly from a tailwind, so things that are going in our favour. Premiumisation continues, although it is slowing. But we shouldn't be surprised about this because we've been on the premiumisation path for at least a decade, and we've done really well at it. And the other part is that we're speaking to boomers who have now, well, boomers and probably Gen Xers who have moved through that phase with us, and they're still heading in that direction, but it is slowing. So we need to think about, what might happen as that starts to stagnate a little bit. My second point here, despite the softer economic conditions, and there's no doubt that there has been a little bit of softening in the market, I think the purchasing behaviour in the D2C channel has held up well, certainly from the premiumisation side of things. And we know that people on our lists at wineries and at retailers tend to buy at the more premium end. They're the more wine interested parties anyway. And if we break that down further, we might find at our cellar door, we get a higher share of sort of mid-range price points, but through our clubs and our off-site direct-to-consumer, we see more of that premium purchasing. But I think that is still fairly robust within this channel. My third point here, the quality of technology partners and service providers that are supporting the wine industry, that's both locally and internationally, has never been better. I think there's a little bit of consolidation starting to happen with some of the tech providers, certainly with the off-the-shelf solutions, and I think that's a good thing. But there continues to be some really robust developments in those areas, which I think is a plus. Of course, everyone's been talking in the last couple of weeks about the removal of China's tariffs. And for me, look, this is, how does this affect D2C? I think not directly, but from my perspective, it provides the opportunity to alleviate the oversupply issues, which are putting some downward pressure on pricing. And I note that most wineries in Australia haven't been increasing their prices despite some of these inflationary indicators. So I think that's probably where it impacts D2C. If I was to say that's a tailwind, if I was to say the opposite, as in a headwind, it might be a distraction for some wineries if they're out there chasing that export market again. But I would say just try and stay focused evenly on the channels that matter to your business. And then my last point for a tailwind, so these are things that are going in our favour, is that we're seeing strong e-commerce growth in the non-winery off-premise sector. And I think what's the impact of this for you guys? It's really a normalisation of how a normalisation of online purchasing for wine-interested consumers. So I think this is really interesting. I've been talking to retailers, a couple of sort of small boutique retailers here in the Sydney market, and they've indicated to me that they're seeing if they're looking at their channel split, they are 50% retail and 50% direct. And I think that's fascinating in terms of where that's moved and how quickly that's moved. And that's certainly for retailers that are embracing embracing the channel. And if I can cast your mind back, and I don't expect any of you to remember my babblings in the Wine Australia webinars back during COVID, but I recall calling out that our competitive set in this space, in the Australian market, is not just other wineries. It's very much the retailers. And of course, they're well positioned in metro areas where they can resource probably a little more easily and embrace the technologies, and they have a constant flow of traffic, and they have choice and flexibility around their product range. So we are seeing that come into fruition. So I guess, this trend, and it is in your favour, but it comes with a couple of issues, I guess, is that consumers are still being heavily educated around buying online. I think that hasn't translated so well into the wineries in the regional areas because of things we know. those being choice and flexibility. You're limited in most cases to a single brand. Consumers are promiscuous, they like to try different things, and also delivery. If we look at some of the boutique retailers here, and I speak exclusively in the Sydney market, of course, because it's where I live, but I'm sure it's the same in Melbourne, etc. But there's a lot of people offering same day or next day delivery. So that's difficult to compete. So you've got this really great thing that they're educating consumers and breaking down any of those barriers to online purchasing, but some challenges as well. But keep that in mind. I think that's really interesting as a tailwind. So as far as headwinds, I think there's a lot of negative talk in the wine industry at the moment, and I think we need to be a little bit careful about that because it's not all doom and gloom. But certainly we are seeing that wine consumption globally is in negative territory, and I'm sure you're all very familiar with sort of the key reasons around that, and I've jotted those down here. But there is this idea of wellness merging with the sober curious. And we're seeing that sort of manifest in things like Dry July and Feb Fast, etc. But there's certainly a lot of noise being made about alcohol moderation. And, I think this is an interesting one because we seem to weave in and out of this dialogue, I guess, in terms of how that is impacting our industry. And I was reading something the other day about how to negate this, and it was actually an article by Felicity Carter who was saying, look, the more negative press there is, the more it feeds on itself because, of course, the algorithms and Google picks it up, etc. So we need to counter that with a little bit more positive language. And I don't know, you guys will probably have a good sense of whether that's affecting you or not at the winery level, but I do think it's just something to be aware of, this alcohol in moderation. Obviously, there's increased competition, and that competition is coming from other categories, particularly RTDs, and that's obviously with the younger age groups, and we're not talking about boomers here, we're talking about, the millennials, etc. Although under 50s are drinking wine, but they're drinking across categories, so it's just a different consumption pattern than we have perhaps seen in the past. And I think the spirits categories have just done an excellent job in relevancy and pushing their products forward. But there's definitely increased competition, and there's definitely economic pressure that we're all aware of. Reduction in discretionary spend and increases in inflationary costs. That being said, it's definitely not all doom and gloom. I do want to spend a little bit more time on demographics. And I think where this is relevant for the direct-to-consumer space is just how we're setting up wine clubs and how we're talking to different consumer groups, and just our messaging. So I'll spend just a couple of minutes on this. As we know, the boomers still lead all cohorts in wine consumption. And this is still a positive thing. However, it's not something that we can rely on forever. And I think we know that. So, and I certainly know in talking to my clients, we're talking about how do we transition into appealing to the millennials and the younger markets. So it is something that we need to be thinking about. Different cohorts definitely have different purchasing patterns through the omni-channel. And they're looking for different attributes in their ideal wine. So, and again, for a single brand winery who has an established positioning, this is not something you're going to flip on your head, but it is just something to be aware of, certainly from visitation at the winery level through to how we're talking to consumers online. And the last point here, no and low alcohol consumption is expected to grow over the next 5 years in these younger age groups, probably in line with the wellness and sober curious groups, but they do account for a very small share of the market. But again, just something to keep an eye on in terms of growth in that area. I've got a slide here which I really enjoyed. It's from the Silicon Valley Bank report that came out last year, but it's from 2022 data, and just showing these values of boomers versus millennials. And again, bringing this back to D2C, it really is about how we're targeting certain parts of our list and how we're talking to them, and making sure that, you know, we're communicating in a way that is relevant for them. And I've just pulled out a couple of ones here that I thought were particularly relevant. The first one here is technology. The boomers think about technology as an area for improved efficiency, whereas the millennials think about technology in the areas around communication and connection and to be entertained. So it's a marked difference there. And then choice in food. The boomers are thinking, don't eat it if it's bad for you. And the millennials are thinking, only eat it if it's good for you. So again, there's just this subtle difference in, I guess, messaging that's required. From a business point of view, boomers, capitalism is the path to individual wealth. For the millennials, business success comes with social responsibility. And you can see how these things all start to tie in for the millennial groups. And I don't need to read through the others. You'll see it on the recording if you hop in and have a look afterwards. But landfills and waste and experiences, and I will call out experiences because that's something that you see at your winery all the time. But, you know, for boomers, it's a bucket list, tick it off. But for the millennials, it's a unique and adventurous and socially connected experience. So there's really some marked differences, but I think that dovetails really well into sort of messaging and copy. And, you know, these reasons to engage, reasons to buy. And I also have to call out the one that I like the most on this slide, which is the government. The boomers, not to be trusted, and the millennials, not to be trusted. Fancy that. So last slide on this, but I thought this was just a nice example. It's a random one that I've picked out, but Doozy Drinks is a newly launched RTD, if you like, by some Sydney Swans players. I think I had made a footy reference in my last webinar. Go the Swans. But I like the positioning here. It says Doozy reminds us not to take life too seriously and that often the best moments amongst friends are the imperfect ones that we talk about for years to come. It's a long-term innovation platform that will move with the tastes and attitudes of drinkers. And I guess, look, the point here for D2C is to just be mindful of these shifts. Be mindful of who's coming through your cellar door. And this obviously dovetails into data collection and age groups, and test and try some different, it really comes down to copy techniques, I think, but, you know, making sure that you're hitting the sweet spot with these different cohorts. So they're the macro trends. And then usually I dovetail into some sort of macro and micro D2C trends, but I haven't been able to find any good data. I was in touch through Wine Direct with analytics in the US just over the last week, and they are going to run, they for some reason haven't run an Australian report this year, but they are going to do one, and I will summarise that and reissue it in this presentation and upload it so Angus and Prue can upload it online. But some stats are coming. I would be careful. I did read something in Wine Australia through their report that came through in January, but I think the data set just wasn't big enough. The key here is that any trends that are coming through from a channel perspective are averages. And as you would all know, those averages don't necessarily apply to you. It depends on where you are in the growth cycle of D2C. So someone starting out in the space is going to be generating very different results in terms of growth and stabilization as someone in the middle and mature parts of the cycle. So just be wary of some of the data that's out there. But I will commit to uploading some updated data, which is from a much larger sample set in the next week or two. So that kind of sets a scene for some trends, I guess, broad trends in the market. Oh yeah, I did just want to highlight some things that you might find useful that you can access anytime. And I have mentioned this before, but on the Wine Direct, which is a technology platform, on their website, if you go on right now on the top tab, you can download a free report of all of the US analytics. The US market is in contraction on the D2C side. And if you remember from my webinar last year, we talked about the cycle of these direct-to-consumer programs having about a 20-year horizon, and the US has hit that point. So acquisition, attrition have leveled out, and now they're starting to go backwards, which was similar to the Cellar Masters experience back in the 80s to 2000s. So I think that's really interesting that that's being ratified through this data. But that data is not relevant for you guys because in the Aussie market, we're at a different stage of the cycle. But it is a good read, and I would suggest just to educate yourselves on some of the metrics and the terminology that you go on and have a look at that report. It's free. Silicon Valley Bank has a wine division that's been operating for a long time. They also issue a state of the US wine industry, and their report is online, and that's also free. It's a really good read. I've got some of my macro trends from that report, but it's useful in the context that the US is usually, I don't know, maybe five to 8 years ahead. There's definitely different nuances in that market, but it just gives you a good feel for what's going on. Wine Australia obviously issues their market insights report. That is free. And then Wine Intelligence has their reports, but they're paid. They're pretty expensive. They're really good, but they're pretty expensive. But I just wanted to give you that as a bit of a reference if you're interested in just sniffing around and having a look at some of the trends. Okay, so then on to the road map. So for those of you that have tuned into a webinar before, you would have seen this. And I do use it as a bit of a guiding principle with some of my clients too. But the 8 areas I've broken down as areas to sort of look at and optimize are, firstly, channel potential, then strategy, then resourcing, technology, customer journey mapping, customer service / customer experience, fulfillment, and then relentless execution and analytics. And I think for this webinar, if you can go through and think about your own business and isolate the areas in this roadmap that you can focus on that will give you further leverage to drive your channel forward, I think that's the best approach. So the first one here is I just need to make sure that my microphone's still on because it just flicked through to another device that I've got here. Can you still hear me?
Yes, it's fine.
Terrific. So yeah, channel potential is something that I always talk about. What is your channel potential? And then before I sort of talk more specifically about how to model that, I know you've all probably seen this slide before, but this is where your head should be at. So if you are a winery that's 5 to 20,000 cases, you should be looking at pushing 50 to 70% of your volume through your direct-to-consumer channels. It's the most profitable channel. It's the channel that you've got the most control of, and it will drive your bottom line in terms of business profitability. Then as you get bigger, that percentage is going to come back, and that's just a pure factor of maths. Until you get to the larger wineries where you really have a small percentage going through the direct-to-consumer channel. Might be still a decent volume, but it'll be a smaller impact from a profitability point of view. But what you will generate is eyeballs to your brand. So really valuable brand messages. So in terms of modeling the size of the opportunity, it's highly predictable. So certainly the cellar door growth model is highly predictable, and there's a natural ceiling on just a couple of key variables. And again, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but there are some new people. I can see the list in front of me, and there are some new names on here. So for those that haven't heard this before, the variables are simple, and they are obviously visitation to your website, and then conversion to the list. Right, that's just jumped around here, sorry. Conversion to list, and then looking at your attrition and average order values. So measuring and analysing these are critical to understanding the size of your opportunity. Now, it doesn't matter if you're just starting out or whether you've been at it for 5 to 10 years, you can still look at the size of your opportunity and understand where you are in the cycle. So I think that's really valuable. Certainly looking outside of the cellar door model for future growth is really important. There's really not a silver bullet for this, and no one's worked it out quite yet. But I've got some thoughts around investment pure marketing investment, and absolutely the e-commerce channel that I'll chat about a little bit later on. But you do need to look outside of just the cellar door model for future growth, and particularly if you're at a mature phase. So channel potential and understanding that is really important. If you're stuck on how to do that, let me know. But it really is quite a simple modeling over a sort of a 5, 10, 15-year period. So once you understand what that looks like, you obviously need to sit down and develop your strategy. And again, it depends on where you're at in your own D2C business. So for those that are launching a business, you really need to be looking at this size of the opportunity, budgets, wine club, tasting room, the basics. If you're in the growth or the middle of the cycle, you need to be obviously honing in on your wine club and training and conversion, etc., and making sure that you're optimizing that. But also starting to look at retention. How am I going to hang on to my customers and reduce my attrition rates? You also need to be focusing on email, telemarketing, and website and your social media and analytics. And then, not to get too repetitive, but if you're in the flat or mature stage, you just need to go harder on that middle section around attrition, but also your analytics, to make sure that you really are looking into your list size and slicing and dicing that data, segmenting your offers and optimizing your response rates. And I know that there are some good case studies in the US analytics report that calls out that the wineries that are doing that are still generating growth. So still generating growth, even though they're at the flat or mature stage of the cycle. So I can't emphasize enough, and that was the guts of my webinar last year, was on the analytics side of things, and I'm still on that bandwagon. So back to the strategy side of things. You need to know where you are in the life cycle to make sure that the strategy is targeted to what you're trying to achieve. But some examples might be, if I'm in the mid cycle or the mature cycle, I want to focus on channel shifting, a percentage of my volume into the direct to consumer channel from the mainstream channels. That might be your strategy, or your objective, sorry. And then your strategy is, well, how am I going to do that? How am I going to channel shift? So I might focus on my analytics to drive conversion and response rate. I might focus more heavily in the tasting room on incentives and conversions. Or if I'm a large brand, my objective might be just to generate brand impressions. So, sorry, that sounded a little bit muddled, but at the end of the day, the strategy needs to align with where you are in the growth cycle, and you need to be very targeted around your objectives, your strategies, and your tactics. And I'd encourage each of you, as you come towards the end of this financial year, to put in a fair bit of rigor around that planning process. So understanding the channel potential, putting on paper your objective, strategy, tactics of how you're going to achieve that. I think that will go a long way towards, sorry, having some driver issues here. Just putting some more rigor around the channel for you. The other points here are just to work out what investments you need in the channel to deliver on your strategy. I think wineries typically are hesitant to invest. That has been my observation over a very long period of time. Hesitant to invest in really robust websites, hesitant to invest in, resourcing. And I guess this is why I'm so big on the channel, the size of the channel opportunity and the P&L side of things. Because if you can understand in a very granular bottom-up way where your revenue is coming from, you can apply the relevant investments that you need in technology and people to accommodate that. And I mean, the pure example is, if you look at the sales channel, a lot of wineries have a sales division and the overheads for that. We need to apply the same thinking in the D2C space. So I'm really big on looking at these channel P&Ls right through to the bottom line. I was interested to see again in the Silicon Valley Bank report where the US is investing in their D2C channel at the moment. And I think this is just a nice snapshot and some good thought starters for you guys. But 45% of wineries are looking at increasing their marketing budget. And what does a marketing budget look like in D2C? Well, it could be anything from your print materials through to you could put incentives in there. You could be investing in your website. So anything that is sort of marketing related, social media spends, etc. But 45% of wineries are looking to increase that. And I think that's really interesting in an environment where they are seeing soft sales. You know, remember sometimes that's the right time to invest. So don't be afraid to test and invest in your marketing spend. I know I was talking to a fairly large winery sometime in the last 12 to 18 months about, you know, this silver bullet growth outside of the winery. And what I've never seen a winery look at a really, really heavy digital spend, sort of digital spend through social, through to the website, that is driving either list or club. And I still think that's an opportunity that somebody could test, particularly for a larger winery where you've got robust marketing budgets. So I think we just need to think a little bit differently about that. 31% of wineries in the US are looking to upgrade their systems. I know a lot of you are often thinking about that. And you'll know when you need to move into a new platform, either the existing provider is not providing what you need, or you're moving from a really mandatory system. So that's still a heavy area of investment. 28% are engaging in outside consulting firms. 26% are hiring employees dedicated to digital marketing. And then a good 22% had no added investment planned. But the majority are investing in the channel, and there's some things that you might want to think about. And then I just wanted to give some really practical areas for growth around this strategy piece for the basics. So for those of you that are operating in, you know, recurring wine clubs, email, outbound telemarketing, and website, here are the things that I would focus on to try and drive your revenue in the next 12 months. So for recurring wine clubs, it's obviously about optimizing those conversion rates at your cellar door. And I think this is slightly interesting because the model has changed a little bit since COVID. In terms of how we are servicing customers at the cellar door. Seated tastings sort of means there's fewer dedicated opportunities coming through the cellar door, but it's a much richer opportunity for conversion. And Shaw & Smith have always done a beautiful job at this way pre-COVID. They had their seated tasting with a cheese plate and a very high conversion rate because there was high attention to each individual consumer. So that's definitely still an opportunity. Incentivizing staff and making sure that you are looking at their KPIs and including these conversions to list and wine clubs as a key driver. And I still, in 2024, speak to wineries who are not measuring their data really strongly in terms of traffic and conversions, but that's absolutely key. It gives you total visibility in terms of the modelling, you know, but also gives you an understanding of whether you're optimizing that piece or not. Providing sales training. Sorry, now I've got the doorbell and the dog. I'm just going to have to stop Banjo. I have a little mini dachshund, but he barks incessantly. One sec. Hey, Banjo. Sorry.
Just a reminder, everyone, if you've got some questions, to type them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen.
Right, so I'm back. We'll just have to put up with that for a few more seconds. So incentivizing staff, providing sales training. So I see wine clubs as a product, and you know, I think we need to be thinking about it in that mindset. Wine is a product, but so is your wine club, and providing good sales training around that. And I've already talked to the seated tasting side of things. So that's the recurring wine club. Email. I would be looking at personalisation based on transaction data and segmentation to drive growth. So these aren't new things, but I wonder how many of you are actually, you know, doing this to the best of your ability. You know, I think there are some good analytics tools that are coming on the market, analytics being one of them through Wine Direct, but also Wine Pulse. I just have to tell this person to go away from the door. Hang on a sec.
Apologies, everyone. She'll be back in a minute.
Did you just hear that? Anyway, sorry, that's a little chaotic. So this personalization on transaction data and segmentations drive both. So I think we can do a better job here, and there are some products on the market that will make that a little bit easier. And then obviously reviewing copy and the use of direct copywriting techniques to increase conversion. And again, I don't know that there is, that there's a lot of the use of a lot of really good direct marketing copy out there. And I think that's because wineries are a little bit scared of the call to action and, being sort of sounding like a bit of a salesman. But I think that is another area that you can focus on. And I know I've directed you to AdMark courses and, various things that can help in that area. So then moving on to telemarketing and your website. Telemarketing is still a really valuable piece of the sales pie, I guess. And my recommendation here is to bring that top 250 in-house. I know there's been some changes to some of the third-party providers in this area, but I think if you can run your RFM analysis that I'll talk about a little bit later on and look at your top 250 customers, bring them in-house. There's no doubt you'll get an immediate margin uplift, notwithstanding the resource that you need to do it. But also, it helps from an attrition point of view as well, just in terms of building that relationship. And then test maybe some of this sort of omni-channel for your outbound, which is an email followed up with text, followed up with call. And there's some real sequencing around that. But I think there's an opportunity still to drive that part of your business. And I wonder how many of you have got a robust outbound telemarketing program and how many of you are actually doing it in-house. I'd be interested to know. And the last section here, just on areas for growth, is around your website. Please invest in your website. Website trends are changing all the time, and you need to keep abreast of what those are. And I guess it's reviewing for optimal performance around path to purchase. Do you have a simple, robust path to purchase, and does that also apply to mobile ordering? Do you have a best-in-class e-commerce store? Shopify stands out as one of the best and one of the easiest, and it's obviously a plug-in. But you need to be looking at how easy is it for my customer to convert. And content needs to be refreshed regularly. And I know you would have heard all of this a number of times, but that assists in the algorithm. So every time you do an update, it lets Google know that you've done an update and it gives you a bit of a boost. So don't do a set and forget on your website, and make sure the content is sticky and engaging. And something I picked up the other day, that the homepage has reverted to being a billboard. So beautiful moving images with a simple top nav. That's the latest trend. So these things change. So you need to keep abreast of that as well. But there's just some really simple things that I think you could adopt to try and drive growth. Resourcing is always a favourite, and I've been really encouraged in the last, I think, probably 12 to 18 months around certainly my clients' approach to recruiting in the space. I know there's a winery in central Victoria who is recruiting, who has a really robust D2C program, and they're recruiting a person into this position in the high ones. And, I think that is really exciting. It just shows that people are investing in the channel and valuing this part of their business with some really solid resourcing. So as far as skills and what skills you need, and again, this is a repeat slide, but you need a direct marketing all-rounder, someone that understands and can focus on acquisition, retention, offer creation, and is a strong analyst and loves numbers. A social media specialist, someone that's great on the content building and list building, conversion, analysis, data profiling, and loves numbers and technology. I don't need to read through all of these, but what it does show is that there's a really broad and specific skill set that's required, and you need to shop hard to find that. That will be one of the biggest assets in your business in terms of driving the D2C channel. And I understand that's difficult for small wineries, and that's where I guess consultants, and there's a number on this call, but consultants can fill in some of those gaps for you. But if you have a decent direct consumer program, make sure you're investing in some really good resources and plug it through to your P&L and understand, whether you can afford somebody, that's on a decent, that has decent experience in this space. And the piece that I've circled around, in red is the data analyst skills. And this for me is really what drives this channel for wineries, is this analytical mindset around acquisition, numbers, retention, and then list profiling and segmentation, and understanding your technology platform and understanding what questions to ask it, being competent around driving your platform. And then outbound telemarketing obviously is a sales role. And I think there's plenty of great salespeople within your wineries. So that's the resourcing side of things, but it is so critical. Understand the size of your opportunity, build your channel strategy, and then resource it appropriately. And then you'll be halfway there. I'm just going to touch on technology briefly. And obviously your direct-to-consumer tech stack is there to support your strategy. Strategy first, and then shop for your system. Sometimes you'll be looking for a system upgrade, so that's different. You'll be midstream, with your sort of comm strategy, and you'll be looking to upgrade the system because it perhaps doesn't support you. But generally speaking, strategy first, technology second. And just another reminder, I guess, that the technology is not the main game here. It is the enabler of your strategy. It's not the silver bullet, and it really is just as good as the person who's driving it. So you need to make sure that if you're taking on board, one of these systems with various plugins, that you've got somebody that's committed to it and can drive it and understand it well. And I don't think I need to go through this because it'll be in the prezzo that you can look up afterwards. But I guess it's just to highlight that there are a number of pieces to your tech stack that you need to consider. And if it were my business, I'd be shopping for best in class for all of these areas: website, e-commerce, CRM, POS, email, and ultimately flexibility. Open source and flexibility, so you can take advantage of best-in-class software. Okay, so then I just wanted to touch on customer journeys. So we've talked about the top 4 in this roadmap, and I think the customer journey the customer journey piece is an interesting one because it applies to all channels. So it applies to your cellar door, or your retail store, it applies to your website, it applies to your email experience, and it applies to your social media experience. So it applies to everything. And the idea of customer journeys is obviously to map the flow of touch points from acquisition through to conversion through to loyalty. And it's quite a cumbersome process. And again, I wonder how many of you have tackled this, even if just for one channel. Maybe you've done it for the cellar door in terms of visitation and understanding, the touch points, of a customer. Do you have someone greeting them at the door? Do you have somebody, what's your signage like? What's the tasting process like? What are the seated tastings like, etc. But it's something that I encourage, because through that you can improve your processes, which will in turn improve pathway to purchase and pathway to experience and pathway to loyalty. So it's a really important area. If any of you have got my toolkit, I've got an excellent customer journey map that I love, that maps the customer journey, but it also maps the financial indicators underneath it. So it has a really commercial application piece as well. So contact me if you're interested in that. But in terms of struggling a bit with the responsiveness of my slides. Missed it. There we are. So as far as key stages on the customer journey map, this is what they look like. And again, this is pretty wordy. I don't want to read the whole thing, but it does go into customer actions, customer goals, touch points and channels, experience, KPIs, and organisational activities. But it is, I mean, there's agencies that are dedicated to customer journey mapping. I don't think you necessarily need an agency unless you're a large corporate and you've got the funds. But it is an exercise that you can do within your business. And there's some good models that will guide you through the process. And I guarantee that through that conversation, you will find out where some of the sticking points are and therefore where some of the opportunities are. And it's just a very valuable thing for you to be looking at through all of your D2C channels. And then the last area is execution and the analysis of your campaign, something that I'm super big on. I often say to my clients that once you've sort of understood your channel potential and you've locked in your strategy, you've got your system in play, your resourcing, etc., this channel is about relentless execution. And I know Brad Rust has said hello to me earlier. He's ex-Seller Masters as well from many years ago. But Brad would understand that. Relentless execution. So setting your communications plan and executing against it, is absolutely key to delivering, and then analysing each of those campaigns. So this idea of analysis, I guess, around that piece, it is understanding that you need an appetite for data. It's a very data-driven channel. And in fact, I think that's one of the key attributes that I would be looking for if I had somebody coming into this role. You need an analyst with an aptitude for data. I think a lot of the other things exist within your businesses, and there's skill sets around wine expertise and probably communications as well. But I often see the missing piece is this analyst and the appetite for data. And it is an imperative for the channel. Right, so I'm seriously having driver issues today. Will, is my PowerPoint still even there?
No, it's gone off the screen, Georgia. I wonder if Will can set it up again, maybe. There we go.
Can you just go again for me, Will, please? Thank you. This is why I need to be in control, right, Will? Why is that scooting through to that logo? I'm so nearly at the end. I'm just conscious of the time.
One sec, sorry, Georgia.
Thank you. I am just going to do this so I can keep going. Jump back onto my own PowerPoint.
So, Georgia, while we're waiting for this to come up,
yes,
why don't I ask a couple of questions?
Yeah, good idea. Thanks, Angus.
Okay. First question: what do you define as premium? That word has a lot of meaning to everyone as everyone tries to be in the premium space. And do you see any evidence that people are moving away from experience-based sales to a more traditional wine consuming? There are probably two questions there, actually.
Yeah.
First one,
premium. The premium. Yeah, and I think, look, you're right. That's a little bit confusing because there's a number of definitions around price point bracketing and where that sits. But for me, premium sits at the 30 plus. And there's some, as I said, there's some evidence that that's slowing, and that there's growing consumption again in this sort of 15 to 30 price bracket. But for me, premium is 30 plus, which often is the sweet spot for wine clubs and wineries in the D2C space. So hopefully that answers that question. And what was the second part, Angus?
Do you see any evidence that people are moving away from experience-based sales to a more traditional wine consumption pattern?
I'm not quite sure what that question means, actually. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what that means. Sort of wine experience sales to more traditional wine sales.
I suspect it means something along the lines of, do you think that people are moving away from going to visit cellar doors to just to more regular home wine consumption?
I don't think so. No, I mean, I think there's been a little bit of a softening this year. And what I think is interesting is if we look at the trend analysis, sort of pre-COVID, COVID, post-COVID, I think it's been a really lumpy 4 years, and trying to understand, you know, without these anomalies sitting in that trend around visitation, you know, what that looks like. I don't know, but interestingly, in a conversation that I had just last week, talking about how wineries have responded to the seated tastings and to higher paid experiences, I think you're talking to a smaller market when you're doing that. So there's possibly a midpoint there. I mean, I think the plus is through those mechanisms, we get a more engaged consumer and a better opportunity to convert to some of these DTC programs. But the question we need to ask, just in terms of maybe moderating that approach, is are we cutting off our nose to spite our face in some of those areas? Because if our experience offerings are all sort of high price points and seated, etc., that doesn't suit everyone. So it may be, and this is a little bit of a guess, but it may be why we're seeing what we would consider a bit of a move away from this experience side of things. But, you know, I'd have to take more counsel on that because I don't have the answer.
Okay. If you want to finish your presentation, we've got lots of questions, but
yeah, for sure. Okay, so we talked about the customer journey mapping. Oh my gosh, this is just not being my friend today. I've had dogs barking, I've had the doorbell going. Sorry, it's been a little bit messy. And then we were talking about the execution and analysis and the need for data. I think you're all aware of that. I think some of you probably struggle just with that skill set. So get someone in to help would be my answer there. So then we talk about just some of these ideas around additional analysis. And the RFM piece is something that I'm really, really keen on, the recency, frequency, monetary analysis, which takes your database and slices and dices it based on these 3 metrics. It's a pretty rudimentary customer behavior analysis tool, but it'll give you some instant strategy opportunities. It'll give you some instant understanding on who's doing what within your customer base and what percentage are transacting recently, who are my 1K buyers, who are my 3K buyers, who are my high actives, who are my inactives. So just putting a bit of logic around how you're communicating. I would guarantee that most of you are still probably doing a one-to-many email approach, and it's just not going to yield the results that you want, and there's growth in there. I guess that's more the message that underpins that. There is growth if you can start to slice and dice that data. So around setting your priorities, I mean, I don't need to say too much about this, except I guess the idea behind trying to do this refresher was to get you to isolate where you felt that you had opportunity to improve. Was it around the budgeting and the strategy side of things? Is that at sea and you need to kind of model exactly where you are in the channel? And it's a little complex, but it's not that hard. But the key thing there is knowing your numbers. So I guess it is around isolating where you are in the growth curve and what part of that roadmap you think is going to make a difference to you in the next 12 months, because that's going to keep changing. It might be that your big project for this year is the system platform. We're committing to getting a new system platform in place and migrating our data. So going forward, we've got a better platform, a smoother path to purchase, and we've got better data coming through that we can slice and dice and to help to grow the channel. It might be resourcing. It might be that you're committing in the next 12 months to resourcing this channel properly through a good hire, or through the use of consultants or whatever that might be. So I guess it really is to try and get you to look back at that roadmap, which is fairly rudimentary in some ways, but it does break the channel down into, the chunks that are going to make a difference for you. And that's a repeat of my slide around what stage are you at. So I would encourage you to think about that. Think about your channel in the context of, are you 0 to 5 years new? Are you 5 to 8 years middle? Or are you 10 years plus mature? Because that will dictate in part your strategy and what steps you need to take. And then my final thought for today is this. I am interested, there was a significant growth in the e-commerce channels for wineries through COVID, but that's dropped away. And I wonder if most of you have found a similar sort of trend in terms of that coming back as the market has opened up. But I am interested in the idea that 12 to 14% of our volume is going direct to consumer in developed markets. That's fairly consistent globally. And for majority of wineries, that is stemming from visitation to wineries. And whilst that has to be your primary area of focus, so making a real effort to hone that offer and product, the wine club offer and product and the list offering in the cellar door, and optimizing conversions and then communicating from there. We also need to think about this future model for growth. And if we look at the US, we know they're flat. So their acquisition and their attrition has leveled out, and they're struggling for growth. They're in this same boat too. They're looking for what the next thing is. But I guess the point is that most, if you're looking at digital businesses and direct businesses, very few rely on their customers to come to their bricks and mortar store, in your case a cellar door, to buy your products. So there just still feels like there is really good upside if we can tap into the wine interested consumers, because there's still, where are we? Sort of 85% of volume plus is still going through other channels. So if we can find these wine interested consumers and tap into them in another way, how can we do that? And again, I call out the stat of some of the retailers here in Sydney that are telling me that they are now 50-50. So they're 50 in store and 50% out of store. And they're tapping everything. They're doing the corporate tastings, they're on the phone, they're doing the emails, they're doing the website. So I still feel like there is opportunity there. But it requires investment. It requires a best-in-class website. It requires best-in-class technology and e-commerce shopping, and it requires investment, certainly from the winery. So that was just my final thought starter. And that's where I close. Sorry, that was a little bit messy today. That didn't run as smoothly as I'd hoped, with a little bit of the dog and a little bit of the doorbell and a little bit of a slide action.
You did a fantastic job. I was going to say, before today, we were just chatting and Georgia said speaking to a webinar is not particularly in her comfort zone. So I suspect with the doorbell, the dog, and a few slide changes.
Well, actually, no, it's not. I don't mind doing it, but it's you staring at the green button. And I always like a little bit of audience participation. And, I always fear that you're nodding off into your lunchbox.
Well, but the fact that
the dog would have woken everyone up anyway. He's rather loud.
The fact that we've still got everyone here is a good sign. So well done, Georgia. I've got a couple of minutes just for questions. Simon's asked a question about, is there any industry data on wine club member churn that you could discuss?
Yes, there is. And there is. And typically, again, there's industry averages on that, Simon, but it changes depending on how long you've been in market. So let's say you're a winery that's just launched your wine club and you're 2 years in, your churn rate's actually going to be really low, because we know that wine club members stay on board an average of about 36 months, roughly 3 years. So after that point, the churn rate increases significantly. But what I will do, I'll commit to including that in the data that's coming through on analytics, because they do a nice summary of acquisition and attrition in wine clubs. Again, it just provides averages, which I think is really interesting from a macro regional level. What's what's happening. But to me, that tells you more about where the channel is at in that region in its life cycle as an entirety, because sitting underneath that is all of you at an individual stage. And so your churn rate will be different. But I certainly do in my models include early churn rates of about 2% per month, and it compounds over the year. So I would have to know exactly the set of circumstances to get an accurate number. But I will include the averages, the industry averages, in that updated information coming from analytics.
Paddy's asked the question, what's the best way to keep club members not to cancel their membership as the cost of living is high? Any suggestions?
Not directly related to cost of living. Do you know, my experience has been, and this goes way, way back to Cellar Masters in the 90s, sounding archaic, but one of the most common reasons for people cancelling their wine club was financial reasons. So it does tend to be a little bit of a catch-all. If they were either too much wine or financial reasons. So I just throw that out there as a thought starter, because people are often looking for a reason to give you or an excuse to give you. I think as it relates to softening conditions now, I would have to look at, again, the averages to understand whether we are actually seeing a drop-off in wine club memberships, to understand if there's anything out of the normal. But what I would say is that around retention, the best way to do it is to get some sort of predictive modelling going on your, what we would call high potential attritors. So if we know, for example, that someone in your wine club stays on board an average of 3 years, then the tactic I would take is to maybe send something out 3 months in advance of that 3-year anniversary date as an incentive to stay on. So it becomes more an exercise in data analytics and retention rather than the attrition number per se, notwithstanding that you need to model those attrition numbers to understand what's happening in your business.
So I feel like all these questions are rolling into each other. So Simon's asked about the best way to measure conversion and what are the best benchmarks. And he says currently our business is looking at sales as a comparison to number of tastings. And he says that does not really translate into anything usable.
Right. Yeah, look, I have always used visitation. And then I've used a number to, because people usually visit a winery with a friend or a partner or a spouse or 2 or 3 people. So I usually take just the number of people through the door, and I use a dividing factor of, I take off sort of 15% of that to accommodate, because you're not going to get 2 people joining a wine club. At the end of the day, it's more about consistency. So if you are measuring conversions to tasting, and I don't know whether you're talking about conversions, that was Simon, wasn't it, Simon, whether you're talking about conversions to sale or conversions to a wine club, I'd have to understand that. But as long as you are measuring it consistently, it doesn't matter, because it'll give you a trend line in terms of conversion. And then what I would say on my way of measuring, which has always been on traffic with that dividing factor in there, we have always looked at a 5% conversion to wine club and a 10% conversion to list. So they are typical industry benchmarks. Again, averages, and within that you get some wineries that are converting at 10%. I mean, I know there's some wineries that are doing a really amazing job on their direct-to-consumer channels, and their conversion rates are much higher. But I think that purely comes back to how well you're doing it. You know, how well you're training your staff, how well they're incentivized, and whether it's an ethos that runs from the top down. But starting with 5 to 10% on club and then list, and knowing that it can be higher than that too.
Great. Thanks, Georgia. I think we might have to sort of close it out. There are a number of questions. There are particularly a number of questions about giving some examples of good companies that do DTC platforms, POS platforms, CRM platforms.
Yes.
But I wonder, we might challenge you to give us a few suggestions in the follow-up. But also you've got Georgia's email there, and feel free to reach out directly to her. So I will say, unless you want to say anything, Georgia, sorry.
No, that's fine. Okay. I'm happy to throw in a couple of examples in that, maybe in an extra slide when I update the deck with the analytics stuff. And then otherwise, yeah, feel free to give me a call always.
Great. Thank you. And again, thank you, Georgia, for your time today. And we will put the updated presentation up on the website. As to upcoming events from the WCA, there are two events that I think are relevant to this conversation. The first is we are holding a DTC symposium this year. It'll be held again as a face-to-face in mid to late July. And again, I'm absolutely loose penciling in the 25th of June. Sorry, June, I said late June. Loose penciling the 25th of June as a date, but that will be to be confirmed. It's going to be an exciting opportunity for the wine industry to come together face-to-face to drive the growth of the direct-to-consumer market. We'll hear from industry leaders, case studies of what works and what doesn't, as well as what it takes to be a profitable and sustainable, growth-focused direct-to-consumer wine business. The second event is the next webinar, which is Tuesday, the 7th of May, which is titled News, Reviews and Features, Telling Your Stories Through Media. It's going to be a great panel session with wine writers Max Allen, Tom Klein, Nola James, and PR expert Brian Olsen. It'll be an interactive session and promise to be really interesting and insightful, and it's aimed to give the audience a better chance to successfully interact with the wine media. Both events will be listed on our WCA website very soon, and we'll also communicate this via our email and socials. Again, thank you, Georgia. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance, and we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.